Maybe this one. Good morning, everyone. I'm reading Exodus 7 today, 1 to 13, and I'd like you guys to stand with me. Make that for God here. And I'm reading from the English National Version. Then the Lord said to Moses, "See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. You are to say everything I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt, and with mighty acts of judgment I will bring out my divisions, my people, the Israelites. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord, when I stretch out my hand against Egypt, and bring the Israelites out of it." Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded them. Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 83, when they spoke to Pharaoh. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When Pharaoh says to you, 'Perform a miracle,' then say to Aaron, 'Take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake.'" So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh's officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned his wise men and sorcerers, and Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said.
All right. So this is part 2 of my sermon series. We're talking about Moses over this month of July. And this specific passage is kind of one for marks for deep discussion when it's talking about hardening Pharaoh's heart. It can make for some. I'll teach some of you old people a new word, a young people's word. As a youth pastor, that's what I connect with young people. So this passage is, you could call it crate crank. That's the word. If you want to talk about something that's really, really insane, or like there's a controversial thing, you can say, "This is crate crank." So you can now go to your kids and sound really cool when you say crate crank. Or not, or it does make you really weird, probably. But there's lots of controversy over this passage and lots of different views and stuff. So I'm going to talk about it a little bit, but we're not going to get into a huge discussion about free will and things like that, because I think that's for another time. But I'm going to talk about this passage and do my best to give you a little bit of a background and kind of understanding of what else is happening in this passage. So when we left off, Moses had gone to the burning bush and he had talked to God. And God told him what he wanted Moses to do. And we talked last week about the courage that Moses had to be able to muster up that courage to go out and actually go to Egypt, even though he didn't think that he could do it. And so then after a while, when Moses decides to eventually go to Egypt, he meets Aaron on the way, and they go to Egypt to convince the Pharaoh to try and let his people go. So first thing they actually do is they actually have to convince the Hebrew people, the Israelites. God tells them to perform some miracles for them, which I think is also important to remember that these Israelites haven't seen God or experienced God in a very long time. So part of God's plan here was also to show to the Israelites that God is there, God is with them, and God is a powerful God. Once they convince the Israelites, then they have to go to stage 2, and they go to talk to Pharaoh. And that's where I'm going to start today in actually Exodus 5, which is before the passage that Stephanie has read. So Exodus 5, starting in verse 1, says this: "After this presentation to Israel's leaders, Moses and Aaron went and spoke to Pharaoh. They told him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go, so they may hold a festival in my honor in the wilderness.' 'Is that so?' retorted Pharaoh. 'And who is the Lord? Why should I listen to him and let Israel go? I don't know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go.'" Now, imagine with me for a second, because this passage to me is kind of funny if you look at it. If you put yourselves in the shoes of Pharaoh, it's kind of a funny thing, because this Pharaoh wasn't the Pharaoh that the movies tell us that it is. It's not Ramses. It's actually They kind of figure it's this one Pharaoh, Thutmose II, but it could be others. But we know for sure it wasn't Ramses, and it's a totally different Pharaoh who probably had no idea who Moses was or the Israelite God at all. So now if you put yourselves as this Pharaoh, who you don't know them at all, and this guy just comes into your throne room and asks you to set all of your slaves free, that seems like, no? What? To me, it's this funny little moment. I'm just kind of give you an idea of what it would be like. So imagine, so you got Pharaoh kind of sitting in the throne room, right? And he's sitting there going, listen, okay, who's here? Who's Moses? Okay, well, whatever. He's sure. Okay, bring him in. This could be entertaining. Get your slab out. This could be entertaining. I'm gonna write this down. Okay, hi. Okay. You want. Okay, wait. Say that one time. You want who? Okay, wait. So let me get straight. You want your God? God? Which God, by the way? There's so many. Just God. Just God. Okay. You want me to set all of my slaves free for? I don't know you. I don't understand what about this. Why would I do this? You write this down. This is hilarious. We're going to need to remember this. How do you not know how to spell that? How did you get to be a wise man? It's river, statue, eyeball, and then the little riverboat guy. That's what it is. I'm sorry, this just isn't going to work. No, this isn't going to work. I'm not letting my slaves go free. Please. To me, it's just this funny moment to see what it would have been like from Pharaoh's perspective. I'm not trying to justify Pharaoh's actions to come, but it does make sense when Pharaoh doesn't know who Moses is, why he would at first be like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. We're going to keep reading, and I think this next passage really gives us a sense of Pharaoh's personality to help you understand. So, verse 3, it says, "But Aaron and Moses persisted. The God of the Hebrews has met with us," they declared. "So let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness so we can offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. If we don't, he will kill us with a plague or with the sword." Pharaoh replied, Moses and Aaron, "Why are you distracting the people from their task? Get back to work. Look, there are many of your people in the land, and you're stopping them from their work." And then it continues on, Exodus 5:6-9. "The same day Pharaoh sent this order to the Egyptian slave drivers and the Israelite foremen. Do not supply any more straw for making bricks. Make the people get it themselves, but still require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota. They're lazy. That's why they are crying out. Let us go and offer sacrifices to our God. Load them down with more work. Make them sweat. That will teach them to listen to lies." So, it continues. Or did I? No, it didn't. Sorry, my note's wrong. So this gives us a picture of his personality. This is before we've talked about God hardening Pharaoh's heart. This is just Pharaoh's personality. Somebody comes in and opposes him, and his first response is make all of his slaves work harder. So it does kind of say something about who Pharaoh is, that he was already somewhat of a stubborn person, a very rule with an iron fist kind of leader. He wasn't going to let anybody tell him any different. And even God said to Moses back at the burning bush in Exodus 2:19, he says, "But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand forces him. So I will raise my mighty hand and strike the Egyptians, performing all kinds of miracles among them." So God says to Moses, "Look, I know that he is a stubborn person." Before we even got the passage or read that God hardens his heart, he is stubborn. That is who he is. God didn't make him do that. So he's already kind of a jerk to begin with. And that's the main thing I wanted you to understand first, is how stubborn he was before Moses went and did all this stuff. Now, this doesn't maybe solve the problem of this passage of God hardening Pharaoh's heart, but it does give a little bit of perspective of who he is. So Pharaoh makes his decision to make the Hebrews work harder. So the Hebrews then complain to Moses, rightfully so. And Moses then goes back to the Pharaoh, and that's where we read the passage that Stephanie was reading, where now that's Moses going back and talking to Pharaoh again. Now, I don't quite understand why God does the things that he does, but I do know that he has a plan. When you read through this through the Old Testament, God had a plan for the Israelites, for the Hebrews, and he was going to follow that plan. It's a good plan, whether or not we understand it. A part of that plan is showing to Egypt how strong God is, and that you can't mess with his people. And he's behind those people. So God starts to send plagues onto Egypt to try and convince Pharaoh. So there's all kinds of different plagues. We're not going to read all of them, but he sends a plague of locusts and a plague of flies and all of these different things. There's a couple ones that I want to talk about and just showcase some kind of interesting verses to me. So the first plague that he sends is he turns the Nile River into blood. And it says at the end of that passage that Pharaoh's heart remained hard at the end of it. Now, what's interesting when you read all these different passages, there's passages that say Pharaoh's heart remained hard, and then there's passages that say God hardened Pharaoh's heart. I'm not telling you what to think, I'm just telling you what I read as the translation of it. And why would there be a difference between God hardened and his heart just remained hard? Did he make that decision himself? I don't know. So God sends more plagues. Another plague that he sends is the plague of frogs, which to me is really nasty. If you would think about your house being filled with frogs in your clothes and in your bed and like everyone like that would just be so gross, like frogs. Yeah. So Exodus 8:15. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, raise your staff in your hand over all rivers and canals and ponds in Egypt, and bring up frogs over all the land." So Aaron raised his hand over the waters of Egypt, and frogs came up and covered the whole land. But Pharaoh's magicians were able to do the same thing with their magic. They too caused frogs to come up from the land. And Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and begged. This part is interesting to me. Pharaoh begged to Moses, "Plead with the Lord and take the frogs away from me and my people, and I will let your people go so they can offer sacrifices to the Lord." So he's like caved in at this point. Frogs are borderline too gross for him. He says, "Okay, I will let your people go." "Set the time," Moses replied. "Tell me when you want me to pray for you, your officials, and your people. Then you and your houses will be rid of the frogs. They will remain only in the Nile River." "Do it tomorrow," Pharaoh said. "All right," Moses replied. "It will be as you have said, and you will know that there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs will leave you and your house, your officials, and your people. They remain only in the river." So Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh's palace, and Moses cried out to the Lord about the frogs that he had inflicted on Pharaoh. And the Lord did just what Moses had predicted. The frogs in the houses, the courtyards, the fields, all died. The Egyptians piled them into great heaps, and a terrible stench filled the land. But when Pharaoh saw that relief had come, he became stubborn. He refused to listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had predicted. Again, just as he became stubborn. And this same thing happens 3 times throughout all the plagues, where God sends a plague, I think it's the plague of flies. And same thing, Pharaoh says, "I can't take this anymore, send them away and let your people go." Moses calls out the flies, and Pharaoh changes his mind. Same thing happens again with another plague, with the storm. And so, to me, that's really interesting that he then caves in and says, "Okay, I'll let your people go." And then says, "Just kidding," and then pulls back once he sees that there's relief. So, to me, the way I read that is that I think Pharaoh had choices there. I think he had an opportunity to say, "Okay, I will let your people free." But then he changed his mind. So again, we're going to have a discussion here about free will. But the way I read those passages is that while we may not understand in the beginning why, there are parts of those plagues where it says God hardens Pharaoh's heart. And that's what it says, so I can't argue that. But it seems like there are points in that passage, or in that whole story, where God gives Pharaoh a choice. And but throughout this story, even if we maybe don't understand or know this part about God hardening Pharaoh's heart, we can all agree that God did have a plan, and it's an important plan that he's trying to fulfill, even though we may not understand it. And so a big part of that is showing, again, his power to the Egyptians and to the Hebrews of how great he is, and that you can't mess with his nation. And if you think about it, it is all very important for him to show how powerful he is to the Hebrews, because we read later as to how much they kind of messed things up and started to complain. So how much more do you think they would have complained had they not seen God's power at all? if he would have just walked in and said, let me people free, the Pharaoh says, okay, and then all the slaves go, and then they would have had like no concept at all then of God. Whereas this actually shows to them what God can do. God had a plan, and we forget that with this story. With most stories, we pull the one verse out and say, I don't get that. I don't like that part. But he did have a plan. Sometimes we don't always see the big picture with our, tiny human brains. We don't actually get all of what's happening. There's more to this story. We kind of like the song we watched at the beginning from that Prince of Egypt movie. I like the way that Jethro says, look at things through heaven's eyes, not through the way we look at things, but try to see that bigger picture. So God had a plan for the Israelites, but he's also got a plan for you, and he has a plan for us. And it seems kind of cliche to say that, but it's true. It seems like we focus more on having these deep philosophical discussions about these small things, but we forget about the simple things. But do you actually know that God has a plan for you? Have you thought about that plan? Do you try and find out what that plan is for you? We would rather talk about God hardening Pharaoh's heart than what God's plan is, what he wants us to do. There's things that come in our life that we maybe don't like, or sometimes we hear the plan and we're not going to be a huge fan of the plan that he has for us. We don't like it. There's certain parts of it we don't get. But we need to stop being fixated on one thing and understand that God's plan is better than our plan. After God sends all these different plagues to Egypt, he eventually sends the final plague of death, which strikes or takes, and it's tough, kills the firstborn child in every home that doesn't have lamb's blood spread on the door. And that's the final plague that he sends, which then causes Pharaoh to cave in and finally set all of the Israelite people free. So he did have a plan, and a very important plan. I don't always know why he does these things, or why things are the way that they are, but they're very important, these plans. In Sunday school, we went through a curriculum that's called What's in the Bible, which is a pretty good curriculum. And I really liked the one that we watched where it kind of summarized the Old Testament as being God's plan. So it was something like that. It was working through all of these different stories and people to create this plan that he had to eventually work up to one final most important moment in history, which is why they call it history, or his story, was the way they explained it. And I thought that was really cool to look at the Old Testament, to look at all this of God's great plan that he has. Again, I don't always get it. I don't always know what his plan is, but I trust that it's a good plan. That same video clip that we watched where Jethro sings, there's a first line that he sings of the song that I really, really like. And it says, a single thread in a tapestry, though its color brightly shines, can never see its purpose in the pattern of the grand design. Like, that's a cool way to look at it. Because we may look at it and see this one little thread, this one color, who we are, and say, oh, I'm the orange strand. I hate being orange. Come on, I'd rather be green, frankly, because green's a great color. But no, I end up being orange. But when you're just that one thread, you don't see the picture that God sees. You could be a beautiful little outline of orange in a greater picture. Or maybe that thread soon to come is going to have an explosion of orange all over the tapestry. But you don't know. And we get envious of other colors. We say, I want to be like that color. I want to be like this. He says, well, he made you orange because he's got a better plan for you. But I guess the question isn't so much, do you know? The question isn't so much, do you know that God has a plan for you, but are you willing to follow through on the plan that he has for you? Because I believe that Pharaoh was given a choice, and I believe that we have a choice too. That God has a plan for you. He's laid it out. It's got a beautiful tapestry that he wants to see you become. But are you wanting to follow that? Maybe you don't know. Maybe God hasn't told you what it is. Maybe you're just sitting there like, I want to know, but I don't. That's okay. But keep striving to find that plan. Don't just stop and say, well, I know it's going to drive. It's like, well, find that thing. Find what that plan is. Maybe you do know what that plan is that God has for you. Maybe He shared that with you. I want you to do this. You're not quite ready to accept what He has for you. You don't like certain aspects of it. And again, I can't make you make that choice, and God's not going to make you make that decision to follow through on His plan. You have to decide to follow through on His plan. But I got to tell you that it is a good plan. It's a better plan than anything we could come up with. This story of Moses and all this, it's a great story, and it leads up to the greatest moment in history where Christ died for all of our sins. But it was part of His plan, and people had to get beside that. Next week, we're going to talk more about the Israelites' journey through the desert. For now, we're just going to stop at Moses and the Israelites being set free and heading towards the Red Sea. And can you imagine being the Israelites? They would have been a little bit confused, like, you're just set free into this desert, so now we just walk this way, I think. But then God had a plan, and He brought things to them to show them the way. So, just like the Hebrews, there's going to be parts of God's plan that you don't understand, or parts that you don't like. It's not going to be an easy plan. Frankly, sometimes it's a really hard plan. It's a hard. God asks you to do hard things. The Hebrews had to go through a lot of tough stuff, and we're going to talk about that some more too. They go through a lot of troubles, a lot of trials. Even for myself, I would love to not have to stand up here and preach. That would be great. But I think it's part of God's plan of what He's asked me to do at this time. So I'm going to, at this point, do my best to do what God has asked me to do. And just trust that He has a plan for me. So this morning, and as you go home, think about that plan. What does God want you to do? What has He already told you to do? What are things that you think God wants you to do? That plan is very, very important. This morning, as we close, I invite you to, if you want to come up for prayer, if you want someone to pray for you about God's plan, something that you maybe know that you're struggling with how you're going to go about, or maybe you just don't know what that plan is for you, but you'd like someone to pray for you about that. Feel free to come forward. We'll pray with you. People will pray with you. And we're trying to help you figure out that plan, or at least pray that God shows you that plan. So we're going to sing our last song, and as we're singing, feel free to come up and we'll pray with you this morning. So let me just close with prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for how great you are and for the plans that you have for us. The plans that you've set out for us, the plans that you've shown for us, some of us, and the plans that you haven't shown to some of us, but will in the future, Lord. I just pray a blessing over all of the people here, Lord, that you would show all of us that plan and help us to have the courage, like Moses did, to carry out that plan and carry the plan that you have for us, Lord.